Get your weak excuse off my training field before I throw you off myself.
Drill Sergeant Harris's voice cracked across Fort Benning's PT field, like a rifle shot at 0530 hours on a Thursday morning that would change everything. The Georgia humidity hung thick as diesel smoke, coating 248 recruits standing in perfect formation under pre-dawn darkness, all except one. Sarah Anderson stood apart from the formation, her right arm cradled against her chest like broken china. Her blonde curls escaped from a regulation-high bun, catching the harsh floodlights that turned the field into an interrogation room. The fitted gray t-shirt she wore was already dark with sweat despite the early hour, and her blue eyes stayed fixed on some point beyond Harris's shoulder, refusing to meet his furious gaze. In the dim light, she looked exactly like what everyone assumed, another washout who couldn't hack basic training. "Sergeant, I need medical clearance," Sarah said, her voice barely carrying across the 20 feet between them. "My arm?" "Your arm?" Brandon Miller turned from his position at the front of formation, his 6'4" frame blocking out half the fluorescent lights mounted on the equipment shed. The green military camo he wore seemed to amplify his size, making him look less like a recruit and more like a recruitment poster come to life. His shoulders were broad enough to cast shadows over 3 smaller recruits behind him. "Princess got a boo-boo from yesterday's baby exercises." Laughter rippled through the formation like wind through wheat. Phone cameras emerged from pockets despite regulations, because mockery this good deserved documentation. Sarah's tremor worsened under scrutiny, her entire arm shaking visibly against her torso now, drawing more snickers from the assembled recruits. "Look at her shaking," Marcus Davis muttered, from row 3, loud enough to be heard by everyone within 30 feet. "Like a scared rabbit." Jessica Taylor, blonde ponytail perfect, despite the humidity and 0530 wake-up call, stage whispered to her neighbor with theatrical volume, "Bet she's faking. Pathetic excuse for a soldier." Harris stalked forward, each combat boot crushing the dew-covered grass with deliberate force calculated to intimidate. The smell of coffee and barely controlled rage radiated from him as he spoke through clenched teeth. "Mitchell," he caught himself, checking the roster on his tablet. "Anderson, you've got exactly 10 seconds to rejoin formation or pack your bags. We don't do weakness here." Sarah shifted her weight, the slight movement causing her sleeve to ride up perhaps an inch. The edge of dark ink showed against pale skin for just a moment before she quickly tugged the fabric down with her left hand. The motion was defensive, protective, like someone guarding a secret that could detonate. Tyler Roberts, always quick with his phone camera and quicker with commentary, zoomed in on that fleeting glimpse of ink. "Yo, Princess got herself some gangster tattoo," he called out, already composing his social media caption mentally. "What is that, prison ink? You do time before coming here?" But the laughter that followed felt thinner now, less certain. Something about the way Sarah stood, weight distributed perfectly despite the apparent injury, feet positioned in a stance that looked casual but somehow wasn't, made Jake Sullivan narrow his eyes from his position in row 7. The veteran had seen that particular weight distribution before, in places where proper stance meant the difference between breathing and bleeding out. Harris closed the distance between them until his face was inches from Sarah's, close enough that she could count the broken capillaries in his nose from 20 years of yelling at recruits. 9, 8, 7. Sarah didn't move. She didn't speak. Her brown eyes, flecked with something unreadable in the harsh lights, stayed locked on that distant point beyond Harris's shoulder. The tremor in her right arm seemed to worsen under scrutiny, each shake drawing fresh mockery from the formation. 6, 5, 4. Brandon Miller took a step forward, cracking his knuckles with the deliberate showmanship of someone who'd intimidated smaller people his entire life. "Just let me escort her off base, Sergeant. Save us all some time and her some embarrassment." 3, 2. Captain Morrison emerged from the administrative building at exactly that moment, his appearance halting Harris's countdown like someone had pressed pause on the morning's entertainment. Morrison's uniform was crisp, despite the early hour, his movements carrying the careful precision of an officer who had learned to read situations before they exploded. "Sergeant Harris," Morrison said, his voice cutting through the tension. "What's the situation?" Harris snapped to a position of attention that was more reflex than respect. "Sir, Private Anderson is refusing to participate in PT and won't return to formation." Morrison looked at Sarah, taking in her trembling form and defensive posture with the same clinical assessment he'd use on a damaged weapon. His initial evaluation aligned perfectly with Harris's. Another recruit who couldn't cut it. Fort Benning processed dozens of washouts every month. This was just Thursday's entry in that long ledger. Anderson, you have a medical waiver? Sarah shook her head slightly, still maintaining that eerie silence that was starting to unnerve the more observant members of the formation. Then get back in the formation or get off my base, Morrison said dismissively, already turning away because this wasn't worth an officer's time. If watching Sarah endure this public humiliation already has your blood boiling, then you understand exactly why stories like this need to be told. Take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe. It genuinely helps more people discover these powerful moments of hidden strength. And I'm curious, where are you watching this from? What country are you calling home right now? Sometimes the most profound stories of courage transcend borders, and I'd love to know where this one finds you today. The friendly question hung in the air for just a moment before the scene crashed back into motion. Harris, emboldened by Morrison's backing, moved towards Sarah with renewed purpose. You heard the captain. 1. Jessica Taylor pulled out her phone with practiced efficiency, angling for the perfect shot of what she assumed would be Sarah's final humiliation. This is going on my story, she announced to nobody in particular, the day we got rid of dead weight. 0. You're done, Anderson. Harris reached for Sarah's shoulder to physically remove her from the field, his hand already extended when Sarah did something that made half the veterans in formation straighten unconsciously. She stepped back. Not the panicked stumble of someone afraid. Not the aggressive retreat of someone preparing to fight. It was something else entirely, a fluid backward movement that avoided Harris's grasp while keeping her injured arm protected, economical and practiced. The kind of movement you only developed in places where wasted motion meant death. Jake Sullivan's eyes widened. He'd seen movement like that before, in the alleys of Kandahar and the compounds of Ramadi, performed by operators who'd forgotten more about combat than most soldiers ever learned. Don't you dare evade me, recruit. Harris's face flushed crimson, the color climbing from his collar to his hairline. Brandon, Tyler, help me escort this washout to processing. Brandon Miller grinned, stepping forward with the eager confidence of someone who'd never encountered real resistance. My pleasure, Sergeant. As the two large men approached Sarah from different angles, like wolves cornering prey, she did something that made the entire formation go silent. Slowly, carefully, she lowered herself into push-up position. Her right arm stayed close to her body, protected, while her left arm bore most of the weight. The tremor continued, worsened even, but her form was technically flawless. Back straight, core engaged, breathing controlled. Oh, now she wants to exercise, Tyler laughed, his phone capturing every moment for the viral video he was already planning. Too late, princess. But Sarah wasn't giving up. Using primarily her left arm and her core, she began doing modified push-ups. Each repetition was perfect despite the obvious limitation, her body maintaining alignment that would make a yoga instructor weep with joy. 1, 2, 3. Harris stood over her, confusion beginning to war with his anger. What the hell do you think you're doing? Sarah continued in silence. 4, 5, 6. Each push-up caused her sleeve to ride up slightly more, revealing incremental inches of dark ink underneath, the hint of a coiled shape, though nobody could make out details yet. Those don't count, Jessica shouted, her phone still recording. She's not even using both arms properly. Brandon put his boot on Sarah's back, adding his 220 pounds to the difficulty. Let's see how long Princess lasts now. Sarah's body shook with the added pressure, the tremor in her arm amplifying until it seemed impossible she could continue. But she did. 7, 8, 9. The sleeve had now ridden up enough that the bottom portion of what appeared to be a serpentine coil was visible. Black ink rendered an intricate detail that seemed far too professional for what Tyler had called prison ink. Is that a snake? Someone in formation whispered. Jake Sullivan took an unconscious step forward, his training screaming at him that something was wrong with this picture. The pattern of that coiling ink tugged at memories from classified briefings he'd attended in places that didn't officially exist, about units that definitely didn't exist, marked with symbols that absolutely didn't exist. Sarah reached 15 push-ups when Marcus Davis, eager to be part of the spectacle, accidentally kicked her injured arm while moving to get a better camera angle. Sarah collapsed, catching herself at the last moment with her left hand to avoid face-planting into the grass. The impact jarred her, but still she made no sound, no grunt of pain, no curse, no plea for mercy. Pathetic, Harris spat, his voice dripping with contempt that had been building since 3 prior washouts that week. Can't even do basic exercises. Miller, Roberts, get her out of here. As Brandon reached down to grab Sarah's collar with the casual roughness of someone handling defective equipment, Elena Williams, one of the newer recruits who'd been watching with growing discomfort, suddenly found her voice. "Sergeant, shouldn't we let her see medical first? If she's really injured..." "Did I ask for your opinion, Williams?" Harris rounded on her with the speed of a striking snake. "You want to join your friend in processing?" Elena fell silent, but her eyes remained on Sarah with something that looked like recognition, or perhaps respect for someone fighting a battle nobody else could see. Sarah slowly pushed herself back up to sitting position, her right arm cradled against her chest once more. A grass stain marked her gray turquoise where Brandon's boot had pressed, and as she adjusted her position, her dog tags shifted, catching the growing morning light. Jake noticed they weren't standard issue. The metal was different, darker, the kind of tags that came from units that bought their own gear because government issue wasn't good enough for the work they did. "On your feet, Anderson," Morrison ordered, having watched the entire display with growing uncertainty. "You're done here." Sarah rose with surprising grace for someone supposedly injured, her movements controlled and precise despite the tremor that continued its rhythmic shake. As she stood, she made eye contact with Jake for just a fraction of a second, and in that brief connection, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A depth of experience that didn't belong in a basic training recruit, the kind of 1,000-yard stare he'd seen in mirrors after bad deployments. The formation had broken discipline completely now, everyone watching the drama unfold with the rapt attention usually reserved for action movies. Phones were everywhere despite regulations, capturing what they assumed would be the entertaining expulsion of a weak recruit who'd wasted everyone's morning. "March to the commander's office," Harris ordered Brandon and Tyler, who moved to flank Sarah like prison guards. "I'll file the paperwork for medical discharge, clearly unfit for service." As the 2 men positioned themselves on either side of Sarah, Brandon couldn't resist one final jab. "Should have stayed home, princess. Military is for real soldiers, not people who cry about a hurt arm." Sarah's mouth opened slightly, some response forming, but she caught herself, pressing her lips together in a thin line and maintaining her silence. The effort of not speaking seemed almost physical, like she was fighting against years of trained responses that wanted to break free. They began marching her away from the PT field, Sarah walking between Brandon and Tyler with a gait that stayed steady despite favoring her right arm. Jake noticed she was unconsciously scanning the environment, checking exit points, noting the position of every person around her, assessing sight lines and cover. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but unmistakable to someone who'd done the same thing in hostile territory, where a missed threat meant body bags. "Hold on, Harris," Captain Morrison called out, his voice carrying an edge of curiosity that hadn't been there before. "Have her do the obstacle course first." Harris looked confused, his parade ground posture faltering. "Sir, if she's claiming injury, then let's document her inability to complete basic tasks. Video evidence for the discharge paperwork." Morrison's reasoning was sound, but there was something else in his expression, a nagging intuition about this strange, tulant recruit that he couldn't quite articulate. Jessica clapped her hands together, delighted at the extension of the morning's entertainment. "Oh, this is going to be good. Princess versus the rope climb with her fake injury." The entire formation was ordered to move to the obstacle course, 248 recruits marching in loose formation, while Sarah walked between her escorts. As they moved, Elena managed to position herself near Jake Sullivan. "Something's not right," she whispered, quiet enough that only he could hear. "You feel it too?" Jake kept his eyes forward, maintaining the appearance of a regulation march. "The way she moves, it's not random. She's analyzing everything." Sarah accessed the specialized medical kit concealed in her cargo pocket, a compact pharmaceutical delivery system originally developed for combat medics operating in austere environments. The auto-injector contained a nerve stabilization compound that could steady her tremor for exactly 6 hours, long enough to complete any mission profile. Each dose cost more than most recruits made in a month, and the medication itself was restricted to units that officially didn't exist. Her fingers brushed the injector through the fabric, muscle memory almost triggering the activation sequence before conscious thought stopped her. Not yet. Using it now would compromise the cover she'd spent 3 months establishing, and the mission wasn't complete. She pulled her hand away, accepting the tremor as the price of remaining invisible. The obstacle course loomed ahead in the growing dawn light, its various challenges designed to test every aspect of physical fitness that the Army deemed essential. The rope climb stood tallest, a 30-foot ascent of thick manila rope that challenged even the fittest recruits when they had both arms fully functional. "Ladies first," Harris said mockingly, gesturing Sarah toward the course with exaggerated chivalry. "Let's see what you've got, princess." The entire company gathered around, forming a human amphitheater 3 rows deep. More phones emerged, everyone eager to document what they assumed would be spectacular failure. The morning sun was rising now, painting the obstacle course in shades of gold and shadow that would make the footage look dramatic on social media. Sarah approached the first obstacle, a low crawl under barbed wire stretched across 50 feet of dirt and grass. She studied it for several seconds, her head tilting slightly as if calculating vectors and angles that nobody else could see. "Sometime today, Anderson," Harris barked, but his voice carried less conviction than before. Something about her stillness was unsettling. Sarah dropped to her stomach and began crawling. Her technique was flawless, using her legs and left arm to propel herself while keeping her right arm protected but not completely inactive. She moved through the wire faster than most recruits did, with both arms fully functional, her body staying low enough that the barbs never even touched her uniform. The movement was practiced, professional, the kind of low crawl you learned in advanced tactical schools, not basic training. "Lucky," Tyler muttered, but his voice carried less conviction than his earlier mockery. The wall climb was next. 8 feet of vertical wooden planks with minimal handholds designed to test upper body strength and determination. Sarah stood before it, her body utterly still except for that constant tremor in her right arm, which seemed to have worsened since the push-up incident. "She's going to need a ladder," Jessica laughed, but the sound was forced now, uncertain. Or maybe a medical evacuation. Sarah took 3 steps backward, her feet finding purchase with unconscious precision. Then she burst forward with explosive speed that seemed impossible for someone with her injury, hitting the wall with her left side leading. She used momentum and technique to reach high with her left hand, catching a grip point, and somehow managed to swing her body up and over in one fluid motion that looked more like parkour than military exercise. The entire maneuver took less than 4 seconds, and she landed on the other side with knees bent to absorb impact, already moving toward the next obstacle before most people processed what they'd witnessed. The laughter died noticeably. Several phones lowered as their owners forgot to record, too busy processing what their eyes were telling them versus what their assumptions had predicted. Jake Sullivan moved closer to Captain Morrison, his voice low and urgent. "Sir, that technique—" "I see it," Morrison replied quietly, his eyes now locked on Sarah with the intensity of someone solving a puzzle that shouldn't exist. The rope climb was the main event, the obstacle that separated pretenders from soldiers. 30 feet of thick rope, no knots, no assistance, just raw grip strength and technique needed to ascend to the top platform and ring the bell that signaled completion. "This ought to be good," Brandon said loudly, playing to the crowd like the alpha male he'd been since high school. "Princess can barely hold her arm up, let alone climb a rope." Sarah stood at the base of the rope, looking up its entire length, with an expression that might have been calculation or might have been memory. Her left hand reached out, grasping the rope experimentally, testing its thickness and texture. Then, in a movement that made several Marines in the crowd straighten with shock, she wrapped her legs around the rope in a specific pattern, a fast rope technique taught in advanced military schools for rapid deployment from helicopters, definitely not part of basic training curriculum. "Holy cow," Jake breathed, recognition flooding through him. "That's a Special Forces fast rope technique." Sarah began to climb. Using primarily her legs and left arm, she ascended with mechanical precision that looked effortless despite the obvious difficulty. Her injured right arm stayed close to her body, but wasn't completely inactive. She used it for minimal stabilization at key points, each touch calculated for maximum efficiency with minimum strain. The economy of motion was beautiful, each movement flowing into the next like water finding paths down a mountainside. The crowd had gone completely quiet now. Even the phones lowered slightly as people watched, mesmerized by the unexpected display of skill that was rewriting every assumption they'd made. 15 feet, 20 feet, 25. "How is she doing that?" Elena whispered, voicing the question everyone was thinking. Sarah reached the top platform in 43 seconds. With one arm compromised, using a technique that shouldn't have been in her skill set, she'd climbed faster than anyone in the current training cycle. The company record with both arms fully functional was 38 seconds. She touched the bell at the top, the clear ring carrying across the suddenly silent training field, then descended with the same controlled precision that had marked her ascent. When her combat boots touched the ground, she turned to face Harris and spoke her first real words since the confrontation began. "Done, Sergeant." Her voice was calm, quiet, carrying no trace of exertion despite what she'd just accomplished. The tremor in her right arm continued its steady rhythm, as if the climb had been nothing more than a casual walk. Harris's face showed complete confusion, mixed with growing anger at being made to look foolish in front of his entire company. "That was adequate," he managed, the words sounding strangled. "But one lucky climb doesn't—" "Sergeant Harris," Captain Morrison interrupted, stepping forward with purpose. "A word, now." As the two men conferred in harsh whispers that carried enough to suggest serious disagreement, the crowd buzzed with speculation. Brandon and Tyler exchanged uncertain looks, their earlier confidence evaporating like morning dew under the rising sun. Jessica stared at her phone, trying to reconcile the video she'd just recorded with the narrative she'd built in her mind. Technology has transformed how we capture and share these moments of unexpected excellence. The high-definition cameras in our phones, originally developed from military surveillance systems, can now document split-second movements with crystal clarity. These devices, powered by processors more advanced than the computers that sent astronauts to the moon, compress hours of footage into shareable moments that reach millions. The same stabilization technology used in battlefield reconnaissance drones now ensures our handheld videos remain steady, even when our hands shake with excitement or disbelief, preserving evidence of the extraordinary hiding in plain sight. Morrison finished his conversation with Harris and approached Sarah directly, his officer's bearing more pronounced now, less casual dismissal and more professional assessment. "Anderson, where did you learn that climbing technique?" Sarah met his gaze steadily, but didn't answer, her silence more pronounced now because it was clearly a choice rather than fear. "I asked you a question, Private." Still silence, but something flickered in Sarah's blue eyes. Not defiance exactly, but a calculation of risk versus reward that didn't belong in a basic training recruit. Morrison's eyes narrowed, his tactical mind processing anomalies that were stacking up like evidence at a crime scene. "Harris, take the company through weapons assembly. I want Anderson in my office, now." As the formation reluctantly moved toward the armory, their entertainment interrupted but their curiosity inflamed. Jake overheard Morrison making a phone call, his voice low but urgent. "I need a full background check on a Private Sarah Anderson. Something's not adding up here, and I need to know what we're dealing with." The weapons assembly area was a covered pavilion with 20 wooden tables arranged in rows, each station equipped with a disassembled M4 carbine waiting for recruits to prove their mechanical knowledge. The morning sun slanted through the open sides, creating patterns of light and shadow that made the weapon parts gleam like scattered treasure. Harris, still fuming from the rope climb incident and Morrison's dressing down, pointed Sarah to a table at the very front where everyone could witness her next assumed failure. "Since you're so talented, Anderson, why don't you show us how it's done? You have 2 minutes to properly assemble this weapon. Standard procedure, standard time limit." Sarah approached the table, her right arm trembling worse than before, the physical exertion of the obstacle course clearly taking its toll. As she looked at the scattered parts, lower receiver, upper receiver, bolt carrier group, charging handle, barrel, handguards, Tyler filmed eagerly from his position 3 tables back. "This is going to be epic," he said to Brandon, loud enough for Sarah to hear. "Princess trying to put together a rifle with her shaky hands." Sarah reached for the lower receiver with her left hand. Her right hand moved to support it, but the tremor made her grip unstable, uncertain. The part slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the wooden table with a sound that seemed louder than it should have been. "There we go," Brandon shouted, his voice carrying triumph and vindication. "Back to reality." Sarah tried again, this time managing to grasp the lower receiver, but as she reached for the trigger assembly with her right hand, the tremor caused her to knock over the barrel, which rolled across the table and nearly fell off the edge. Tyler's phone captured every fumble, every shake, every apparent failure. "Pathetic," Harris announced, loud enough for the entire assembly area to hear. "Can't even handle basic equipment. This is why we don't accept people who aren't physically capable. But Jake Sullivan was watching differently. As a veteran who had assembled weapons in darkness, under fire, with frost-numb fingers and sandblasted eyes, he'd seen plenty of recruits fumble. What Sarah was doing was something else entirely. She was dropping parts in a specific sequence, her fingers moving in patterns that seemed random, but weren't. It was like watching someone type on a keyboard in a language he almost recognized. "Wait," he breathed, his mind racing through training manuals he'd memorized years ago. "That's impossible." Elena, standing nearby, whispered, "What's impossible?" "She's not fumbling." Jake's voice was barely audible, his eyes tracking Sarah's movements with growing certainty. "She's demonstrating. That's the disassembly sequence from the Advanced Armorer's Manual, but she's doing it backwards, from memory, while making it look accidental." Elena stared at Sarah with new understanding. Why would she do that? Because she's maintaining a cover. Jake's words were slow, each one weighted with implication. And that means there's something here worth hiding from. Sarah continued her apparent struggle with the weapon, each fumble perfectly timed to look like the result of her tremor, each dropped part falling exactly where it needed to be to create the illusion of incompetence. To the untrained eye, it was a disaster. To someone who knew what to look for, it was a masterclass in controlled deception. Harris let the humiliation continue for another 30 seconds before calling time. "That's enough. You've proven my point, Anderson. You're not fit for—" The door to the pavilion burst open, Captain Morrison entering with a tablet clutched in his hand, and an expression that Jake recognized from briefings that came before very bad or very good news. There was no middle ground with that particular look. "Sergeant Harris, clear the building." Morrison's voice carried an edge that made everyone straighten unconsciously. "Everyone out except Anderson." "Sir, what—" Harris started. "Now, Sergeant." The urgency in Morrison's tone killed all protest. Recruits filed out quickly, phones disappearing into pockets with practiced speed. But Jake lingered near the door, his instincts screaming that something significant was happening, something that connected to those impossible techniques and that hidden tattoo. "You too, Sullivan," Morrison ordered, but his voice was distracted, his attention locked on Sarah like she was a bomb that might detonate. Once the building was empty, except for the three of them, Morrison held up the tablet, his knuckles white around the device's edges. "Your background check came back. Anderson. It's interesting. Perfect scores in high school, clean record, normal childhood in suburban Ohio. It's absolutely flawless." He paused, letting the weight of that word hang in the air between them. Too flawless. The kind of background file that's been sanitized, scrubbed clean by professionals who know how to make someone disappear into normalcy. Sarah remained silent, still cradling her injured arm, but something shifted in her posture, a subtle straightening that suggested preparation for whatever came next. "Then I made some calls," Morrison continued, his voice dropping to something more dangerous. "Used some connections from my time at Bragg. Mentioned your climbing technique, the way you move, that partial tattoo we saw." He leaned forward. One name kept coming up. "Unit 731. Harris scoffed, the sound nervous. "That's just military urban legend, sir. Ghost units that don't exist." Morrison ignored him completely, his focus entirely on Sarah. 7 years ago, a joint operation in Syria went sideways. 5 operators went in, 1 came out. The survivor held off enemy forces for 72 hours, protecting the extraction point for a Marine unit that was pinned down. During those 3 days, this operator was captured, tortured, but never broke, never gave up the Marine's position. Sarah's right arm trembled more violently now, but it wasn't just the nerve damage anymore. Morrison's words were excavating memories that had been carefully buried, bringing them into the harsh light of this Georgia morning. "The survivor had permanent nerve damage from electrical torture," Morrison continued, each word landing like a hammer blow. "Tremor in the right arm that would never heal. But here's the interesting part. This operative disappeared after the debrief. Vanished. Became a ghost." Harris had gone very still, his earlier bravado evaporating, as he began to understand the magnitude of his mistake. "Want to know what unit that operative belonged to?" Morrison's question wasn't really a question at all. 731, the Black Viper Squadron, and every member had a very specific tattoo. 7 coils representing the 7 original members, a skull in the snake's mouth representing death itself. The silence in the weapons assembly area was absolute except for the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead and the distant sound of the formation being dismissed outside. "Show me your arm, Anderson," Morrison ordered, his voice carrying the weight of command that expected immediate obedience. Sarah didn't move, her blue eyes fixed on Morrison's face with an intensity that should have been impossible for a supposedly weak recruit. "That's a direct order from a superior officer." Still nothing. The tremor continued, but Sarah's stance had shifted almost imperceptibly, weight on the balls of her feet, center of gravity lowered, preparing for action even while appearing completely still. Harris, his voice now uncertain and small, said, "Sir, maybe we should—" The door burst open again, this time with force that suggested either emergency or complete disregard for protocol. Brandon Miller and Tyler Roberts stumbled in, phones raised like weapons or shields. "Sorry, sir," Brandon said, his bravado returning now that he had Tyler as backup and an audience of recruits gathering outside. "But this is too good to miss. We got to see Princess get busted for stolen valor or whatever fraud she's running." "Get out!" Morrison roared, but it was already too late. Marcus Davis had followed them in, and in his typical saboteur fashion, he reached for Sarah's injured arm with the casual roughness of someone who had been bullying people his entire life. "Let's see this fake tattoo that's got everyone so worked up." The moment Marcus's fingers closed around Sarah's right arm, the entire world shifted on its axis. Sarah's body moved on pure instinct, on training so deeply ingrained that conscious thought couldn't override it fast enough. In a fluid motion that spoke of thousands of repetitions in places where hesitation meant death, she trapped Marcus's wrist with a grip that turned his grabbing hand into a lever against him. Her hip pivoted with geometric precision, using his own momentum and mass against him, and suddenly Marcus was airborne, his 200 pounds of muscle and attitude flying over her shoulder like he weighed nothing at all. He hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from his lungs in an explosive whoosh that echoed through the pavilion. Before anyone could process what had happened, Sarah had him in an arm lock, her knee pressed against his spine, with exactly enough pressure to immobilize without causing permanent damage. The entire sequence took less than 3 seconds, and it was beautiful in its terrible efficiency. Then, as if suddenly remembering where she was, who she was supposed to be, Sarah released him. She stepped back, her face showing something that might have been horror at her own reflex, at the mask slipping so completely. Marcus rolled away, gasping, clutching his arm where Sarah's grip had turned bone into leverage. His phone had skittered across the concrete, screen cracked, still recording the ceiling. But Sarah's sleeve had been pulled up in the altercation, pulled far enough that the tattoo was now fully visible to everyone in the room. The silence that followed was the kind that comes before explosions, before worlds end, before everything changes forever. The tattoo was a masterpiece of ink, and meaning rendered in stark black against Sarah's pale skin. A serpent coiled 7 times around her forearm, each coil so precisely detailed you could count individual scales. The snake's mouth was open, fangs sunk deep into a human skull that looked like it was screaming silently. The artistry was professional, expensive, the kind of work that took hours under the needle and cost more than most recruits made in 6 months. But it wasn't the craftsmanship that made everyone freeze. It was what the tattoo represented. Below the serpent and skull, numbers were etched into Sarah's skin in military stencil font, 7-3-1. Harris's tablet slipped from nerveless fingers, clattering on the concrete floor with a sound like breaking glass. The number glowed on the screen before it went dark, 0617 hours. Time seemed to have stopped, or maybe it was just that everyone's perception of reality had fractured and was trying to reassemble itself into a shape that made sense. Brandon Miller's mouth worked soundlessly, opening and closing like a fish drowning in air. The phone in his hand was still recording, but he had forgotten it existed, forgotten everything except that tattoo and what it meant. Tyler Roberts backed against the wall, his face draining of color until he looked like he might faint or vomit or both. But it was Harris's reaction that confirmed everything. The drill sergeant who'd been screaming at Sarah for weakness, who'd put his boot on her back during push-ups, who'd been ready to discharge her as unfit. He snapped to attention with a precision that only came from muscle memory, so deep it bypassed conscious thought. His hand came up in a salute that was sharp enough to cut, held with a rigidity that suggested he might never lower it. 731, he breathed, and the words carried reverence and terror in equal measure. Black Viper Squadron, you're real. Sarah stood perfectly still in the center of the weapons assembly area, her torn sleeve revealing the full scope of her secret, the tremor in her arm continuing its steady rhythm like a heartbeat that couldn't be stopped. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but carried absolute authority that made Morrison unconsciously straighten. "I'm sorry," she said, each word carefully chosen. Reflex, muscle memory. It's been 7 years, but some things... She trailed off, looking at Marcus, who was still on the ground, still trying to process how someone half his size had put him there so effortlessly. Captain Morrison found his voice, though it came out rough, uncertain. "Your 731 is real. The Black Viper Squadron. I thought it was just legends, ghost stories, campfire tales to scare junior officers." Sarah's smile was sad, ancient, belonging to someone who'd seen things that changed the shape of their soul. "That's the point, sir. Ghosts aren't supposed to be real until you need them to be." She held up her right arm, letting everyone see the tremor that had been the source of so much mockery. 7 years ago, my unit was compromised. Someone sold us out. 5 operators went into Syria, and I'm the only one who came back. 72 hours of holding a position against enemy forces that knew exactly where I was, exactly when I'd be there, exactly how to hurt me enough to make me break without killing me outright. The room was silent except for her words, each one dropping like stones into still water, sending ripples through everyone's understanding of what they'd witnessed. "They used electrical cables," Sarah continued, her voice staying level, professional, like she was delivering a briefing instead of recounting torture. "Car batteries, jumper cables, very specific application of current designed to cause maximum nerve damage without killing. They wanted intel on the Marine unit we were protecting. 13 lives depending on me not breaking." She looked at her trembling hand with something that might have been affection or might have been hatred, the line between the two worn thin by years of living with the consequence. "I never broke, never gave them the Marine position, but the nerve damage was permanent. This tremor?" She held up her arm, letting them all see it shake. "This is the price I paid for keeping 13 Marines alive. Every shake is a life saved." Jake Sullivan, who had been watching from just outside the doorway despite Morrison's order, pushed his way back into the pavilion. His face was pale, his hands trembling now too, but for different reasons. "Tower 4, he said, his voice breaking on the words. "Syria, December 23rd, 2019, Venom Strike Operation." Sarah's eyes snapped to him, recognition flooding across her features. "My unit was pinned down by insurgents," Jake continued, memories clearly flooding back with painful clarity. "We called for extraction, but were told no assets available. Then someone, a ghost sniper, started taking out targets from an impossible position, saved 13 Marines that day." His voice was thick with emotion now. "You saved us. Then you vanished into a dust storm. Command told us you never existed." "Ghosts don't exist, Corporal Sullivan," Sarah replied quietly, using his rank from 7 years ago, proving she remembered him too. "That's the entire point of being one." Harris finally lowered his salute, but his hand shook almost as badly as Sarah's arm. "Ma'am, we..." He couldn't finish, couldn't find words for the magnitude of his mistake. The crowd at the door had grown. Word had spread with the speed that only gossip and social media could achieve. And now, dozens of recruits and instructors gathered, phones out despite regulations, capturing this impossible moment when a ghost became real. Jessica Taylor pushed her way to the front, her perfect ponytail now disheveled, her phone forgotten in her hand. "This is ridiculous," she said, but her voice lacked conviction, the queen bee feeling her authority crumble. "She's just some nobody playing soldier. Look at her. She can barely hold her arms steady." Sarah turned to Jessica with those calm blue eyes that had seen things Jessica couldn't imagine in her worst nightmares. "The tremor," she said, loud enough for everyone gathered to hear, "is from 12 hours of electrical interrogation. They wanted the position of Marine Forward Operating Base Falcon. 13 Marines, including Corporal Sullivan, would have died if I'd broken." She held up her right arm again, letting everyone see the constant shake, letting them understand what it represented. "This is the price of keeping secrets. Every tremor is a life saved. Every shake is a Marine who got to go home to their family instead of coming back in a flag-draped box." The silence was absolute now, even the distant sounds of the base seeming to fade as if the world itself was holding its breath. "But I failed my unit," Sarah continued, and now pain crept into her voice, the professional veneer cracking to show the raw wound beneath. "Someone leaked our insertion point. 4 operators died in an ambush that was waiting for us. My team, my family. They died because someone sold us out, gave the enemy everything they needed to kill American soldiers for money. Morrison's tactical mind was already racing ahead, connecting dots that formed a picture he didn't want to see. And you've spent the last 3 years tracking the source of that leak. 72 hours of torture taught me patience, Sarah said simply. 3 years of investigation led me here, to Fort Benning, to this base, to someone who's been selling American lives for profit, who's still operational, still dangerous. She looked around at the assembled crowd, at the shocked faces and raised phones, at the moment when her carefully constructed cover had been completely destroyed. I came here as a weak recruit because the traitor has been watching. They've been here for years, trusted, integrated, looking for any threat to their operation. If I'd come in strong, skilled, suspicious, they would have run. Or worse, they would have killed me before I could identify them. Brandon Miller, who'd been silent since watching Sarah throw Marcus across the room, finally found his voice. It came out small, ashamed. We mocked you, we bullied you, we put you through hell. You did exactly what I needed you to do, Sarah replied, and there might have been the ghost of a smile on her lips. You saw a weak recruit and treated her accordingly. You made me invisible, dismissible, no threat at all. And while you were laughing at my trembling hand, I was recording everything. She pulled out what looked like a simple thumb drive from her cargo pocket, except Jake recognized it as something far more sophisticated, the kind of encrypted storage device that special operations used for intelligence gathering in hostile territory. Metadata, communication patterns, financial transactions, who talks to whom, who leaves base at unusual times, who has money they shouldn't have. Sarah plugged the drive into Morrison's tablet, and data began flowing across the screen. 3 years of investigation, 3 months of being invisible at this base, all leading to 5 names. Morrison stared at the screen, his face going progressively paler as he recognized one of the names on the list. No, I've known him for years. Which is exactly why he's so dangerous, Sarah said. The best traitors are the ones we trust. Harris was staring at his own hands now, at the fingers that had pointed at Sarah in mockery, and at the boot that had pressed her down during push-ups. I put my boot on the back of a Black Viper operative, he said, the words barely audible. I called you weak. I tried to discharge you. You were doing your job, Sergeant. Sarah's voice held no recrimination, only matter-of-fact assessment. You saw what appeared to be an injured recruit who couldn't perform. Your response was textbook. But the disrespect helped maintain my cover, Sarah interrupted. Although, and now there was definite humor in her voice, your boot on my back was unnecessary. I'll remember that during your next fitness evaluation. Harris paled, unsure if she was joking, and several people in the crowd laughed nervously, the tension breaking slightly. Elena Williams, who'd tried to defend Sarah during the initial confrontation, stepped forward. The maintenance requests you filed, the broken door lock in Building 7, the security camera malfunction in the east parking lot, those weren't real maintenance issues, were they? Very perceptive, Williams, Sarah acknowledged. I needed access to certain areas, needed to create blind spots in surveillance. Maintenance requests are invisible. Nobody questions a work order. Tyler Roberts, still holding his cracked phone, looked at the recording he'd been making and realized with growing horror what he'd actually captured. I was going to post this, make you a viral joke. I was going to destroy evidence of an ongoing federal investigation and compromise a classified operation, Sarah finished for him, which would have made you an accessory to treason and gotten you about 20 years in a military prison. Tyler's phone dropped from nerveless fingers, the screen shattering completely when it hit the concrete. Morrison was still scrolling through the data Sarah had collected, his expression growing darker with each screen. This is extensive, detailed. You've been tracking these 5 suspects for months. One of them sold out my unit, Sarah said, and now steel entered her voice. One of them is responsible for 4 of my teammates dying in that Syrian desert. One of them is planning to do it again. New intel suggests another operation is being compromised. Another unit targeted for ambush. Who? Morrison demanded. SEAL Team 9 has an operation scheduled for next month, Sarah replied. Same region where my unit was hit. If we don't stop this traitor, more operators will die, more families will get folded flags, more teammates will carry guilt that isn't theirs to carry. The weight of this settled over the assembly area like a physical thing, pressing down on everyone present. This wasn't about basic training drama anymore. This was about life and death for America's elite warriors, about stopping someone who'd turned American blood into profit. Jessica, who had been silent since Sarah's revelation, suddenly spoke, her voice small and uncertain. "Sergeant Thompson, he was asking questions yesterday. Weird questions about the new recruits. Said it was a security survey, but he was specifically asking about anyone with prior service or family in special operations." Sarah's attention snapped to Jessica like a laser finding its target. "What kind of questions exactly? About backgrounds, where people were from, but mostly about you after you did that rope climb." He saw the technique, recognized it maybe. Jessica's voice was getting smaller, realizing she might have information that mattered, that her mean girl games had been playing out against something deadly serious. "When exactly?" Morrison demanded. "Right after PT, maybe 0700 hours. Sarah exchanged looks with Morrison, and something passed between them. Tactical understanding, operational awareness, the kind of silent communication that came from years of high-stakes decision-making. "He saw the technique and got suspicious," Sarah said. "Started checking if I was a threat, which means—" "He's the traitor," Morrison finished, already reaching for his radio. "And if he suspects you're on to him—" An alarm began blaring across the base, the harsh klaxon of a security alert cutting through the morning air. Morrison's radio crackled to life with urgent voices reporting, confirming, escalating. "Security, this is Matthews. Lock down the base, no one in or out." But the radio response made Morrison's face go white. "Sir, Sergeant Thompson just cleared the East Gate 5 minutes ago. Said he had a family emergency. We let him through before the alert." Sarah was already moving, her injured arm forgotten, the tremor irrelevant as training took over. "He knows. Someone tipped him off." She turned to Harris with eyes that had gone cold, tactical, belonging to someone who'd operated in the darkest corners of the world. "You announced clearing the building over open comms?" He heard it, knew something was wrong. The room erupted into controlled chaos, but Sarah's voice cut through it like a blade. "Captain Morrison, I need authorization to pursue. Jake Sullivan," she turned to the veteran who'd recognized her. "Tower 4, Syria, you were there. You know what I can do. I need someone who knows the terrain, every back road, every shortcut." Before Jake could respond, Brandon Miller stepped forward, his face showing shame and determination in equal measure. "I grew up here. My dad was stationed at Benning for 15 years. I know every inch of this base and the surrounding area, every deer trail, every fire road, every hidden path." Sarah studied him for a moment, the recruit who'd mocked her, who'd put his boot on her back, who'd called her princess with such contempt. Now he stood before her offering help, trying to make amends for cruelty born of ignorance. "You're driving," she said simply. "I'm coming too," Jake insisted. "Too many." Sarah shook her head. "Smaller footprint, faster movement. Brandon knows the land. I know the target. That's the team." Morrison started to protest, but Sarah was already stripping off her PT gear to reveal a compression shirt underneath. From an ankle holster that none of them had noticed, she produced a compact sidearm. She'd been armed this entire time, carrying a weapon through basic training where recruits were forbidden firearms. "How did you—" Tyler started. "Ghost privileges," Sarah said simply, checking her weapon with practiced efficiency, despite the tremor. "Brandon, I need your vehicle, now." They rushed outside into the growing Georgia heat, the morning sun now fully risen and painting everything in harsh, unforgiving light. Brandon's lifted F-250 sat in the parking area, exactly the kind of aggressive, unnecessary vehicle Sarah had expected from him. He gunned the engine, the sound echoing across the base as they tore toward the east gate. Sarah worked her phone with her left hand, her right still trembling against her leg, pulling up maps and satellite imagery with the kind of efficiency that spoke of countless operational planning sessions. "How do you know where he's going?" Brandon asked, taking a corner at dangerous speed that should have made Sarah grab for the handle. She didn't move, her body adjusting to the momentum with unconscious precision. "Pattern analysis," Sarah replied, her fingers flying across her phone screen. "Thompson has been making drops at the same 3 locations for months, always during his supposed family emergencies. He doesn't know that I know." They blew through the east gate, the guards already alerted to let them pass. The silver pickup's tracks were fresh in the morning dew, heading east toward the Chattahoochee National Forest. "He's got maybe 4 minutes on us," Brandon said, pushing the truck harder. the speedometer climbing past 80. Sarah pulled up satellite imagery, her tactical mind already 3 moves ahead. There's an old fire access road 4 miles ahead. He'll turn north there, leads to an abandoned ranger station. Isolated, multiple escape routes, good sight lines. How can you be sure? Because that's where I would go. Sarah checked her weapon again, the motion automatic despite the tremor. And because I've been tracking cell tower pings from that location for 2 weeks. Someone's been using a satellite phone there. Only people who use sat phones in Georgia are drug dealers and intelligence assets. Brandon glanced at her, seeing not the weak recruit he'd mocked, but the predator she truly was. I'm sorry for everything. The way we treated you, the things we said. Save it, Sarah cut him off, her voice sharp but not cruel. Guilt later. Focus now. If we don't catch Thompson and his handler, more operators die. You want to make amends? Drive faster and don't get us killed. They hit the fire road at 70 miles per hour, the truck fishtailing on loose gravel. Brandon fought for control, managed it, kept pushing. The forest closed in around them, shadows and light strobing through the windshield as they flew down the narrow path. There, Sarah pointed ahead. Fresh tire tracks, veering off onto that smaller trail, barely visible. Brandon didn't hesitate, cranking the wheel hard. Branches scraped against the truck's paint, a sound that would normally make him cringe, but now barely registered. The path was barely wide enough for the vehicle, more suggestion than road, but they pushed through. The ranger station appeared through the trees like something from a nightmare, a ramshackle building that had seen better decades, its walls weathered gray, its windows broken. Thompson's silver pickup sat outside, engine still running, exhaust visible in the morning air. But there was another vehicle too, a black SUV with tinted windows and government plates. The handler, Sarah breathed, her tactical mind processing the scene in fractions of a second. We got them both. This is our chance to roll up the entire network. Wait for backup? Brandon asked, already knowing the answer. No time. They're probably destroying evidence right now, burning documents, wiping drives, eliminating anything that could implicate them or their organization. Sarah checked her weapon one more time, her trembling hand somehow steady in its purpose. You're not trained for this. Stay here. Call it in. Brandon produced a Glock from his glove box, his face set with determination. I may be a bully and an idiot, but I'm an idiot who knows how to shoot. Sarah almost smiled. You ever been in a real firefight? No. Then follow my lead and try not to die. Your death would create too much paperwork, and I've already filed enough reports this month. They exited the vehicle quietly, Sarah moving with that eerie grace despite her injury, years of training allowing her to flow from cover to cover like smoke. Brandon tried to emulate her movement, suddenly aware of how loud his footsteps sounded on gravel, how visible he felt in the morning light. Voices carried from inside the station, and Sarah held up 2 fingers, 2 targets confirmed. She pointed to herself, then the front door, then to Brandon and the back entrance. He nodded understanding, his earlier bravado replaced by focus born of finally understanding the stakes. Sarah counted down on her fingers. 3, 2, 1. She hit the front door with explosive force, weapon up, and sweeping the interior in a smooth arc that covered every angle in less than a second. Nobody move! Thompson was at a table with another man, Middle Eastern features, expensive suit that looked wrong in the rustic setting, definitely the handler. A laptop computer sat between them, along with stacks of cash and what looked like classified documents bearing the red stripes of top-secret material. Both men froze for a fraction of a second, eyes going wide as they processed this impossible appearance of the recruit they'd been tracking, the ghost they'd hoped was just paranoid imagination. Then everything went sideways. The handler flipped the table towards Sarah in one smooth motion, while Thompson went for a weapon hidden at his waistband. The world slowed down the way it always did in combat, each microsecond stretching into clarity. Sarah sidestepped the table, her body moving on instinct, tracking the handler as her primary threat. But her tremor threw off her first shot. The round went wide by inches, showering splinters from the wall behind him, instead of finding center mass like she'd intended. Thompson cleared his weapon, swinging it towards Sarah with the speed of someone who'd done this before, whose muscle memory was trained for exactly this kind of close-quarters engagement. Time stretched. Sarah could see his finger tightening on the trigger, knew her tremor would make her second shot unreliable at this range, calculated in the fraction of a second how many rounds she could take before going down. A gunshot exploded behind Thompson, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. He staggered forward, his shot going wild as Brandon's round caught him from behind. The sergeant collapsed, his weapon clattering across the floor, blood spreading from a wound in his upper back. The handler used the distraction to lunge for the window, moving with trained efficiency toward escape. Sarah pivoted, ignoring her tremor, timing her breathing to the shake, and put 2 rounds center mass with the kind of precision that came from thousands of training repetitions. He crashed through the glass anyway, momentum carrying him even as the life left his body. He landed in a heap outside, not moving, never moving again. The silence after gunfire is always deafening, a void where sound should be but isn't, filled only with ringing ears and racing heartbeats. Sarah kept her weapon trained on Thompson while Brandon stood frozen in the back doorway, his Glock smoking, his face pale with the realization of what he'd just done. "Clear," Sarah announced after checking both bodies for pulse, finding what she expected. She knelt beside Thompson, who was still breathing, barely. "Sergeant Thompson," she said, her voice professional despite the chaos. "You're going to die, but you can die with some honor left. Tell me who else is involved." Thompson's eyes focused on her with difficulty, blood frothing at his lips. You're 731. Thought you were all dead." "I'm hard to kill," Sarah replied. "Who else, Thompson? How many more units are you targeting?" He coughed, spraying blood. Thought I was Patriot. They said military-industrial complex needed." His eyes were fading, consciousness slipping away like water through fingers. "Who recruited you? Who's running the network?" Sarah's voice carried urgency now, knowing she had seconds at most. But Thompson's eyes had already gone glassy, whatever secrets he held dying with him in a ranger station that smelled of dust and cordite and the copper tang of blood. Brandon stood frozen in the doorway, still pointing his Glock at where Thompson had been standing, his hands shaking worse than Sarah's arm ever had. I killed him." "You saved my life," Sarah corrected, gently taking the weapon from his trembling hands. "He would have shot me. My tremor. I couldn't have made that shot in time." The sound of approaching vehicles filled the air, backup finally arriving, too late to help, but in time for the aftermath. Sarah quickly photographed everything on the table before the scene would be locked down and processed. Financial records, communication logs, target packages for future operations, written in clinical detail. 3 more units, she said, reading from one document, her voice hollow with the weight of what she'd just discovered. They were planning to hit 3 more special operations units over the next year. We just saved a lot of lives. Colonel Matthews arrived with a full security detail, taking in the scene with the professional assessment of someone who'd seen too much violence to be shocked by it anymore. 2 bodies, blood pooling on old floorboards, classified documents scattered like leaves, and Sarah Anderson standing in the middle of it all, with her trembling arm and eyes that had seen this kind of thing too many times. "Status," he demanded. 2 hostiles down, Thompson and his handler, intel recovered on a larger network. Sarah handed him a thumb drive she'd pulled from the laptop before anyone else could touch it. "This needs to go to counterintelligence immediately. The network is bigger than we thought." "Outstanding work, Operative," Matthews said, then turned to Brandon. "You too, Miller. That took real courage." Brandon looked at his hands, at the blood spatter on his sleeve, at the man he'd killed lying on the floor. "I just followed her lead, sir. She knew everything." As the scene was processed and statements were taken, and the machinery of military justice ground into motion, Sarah found herself standing apart from the chaos, watching the organized confusion unfold around her. The tremor in her right arm seemed worse now that the adrenaline was fading, each shake a reminder of everything she'd endured to get to this moment. Harris approached cautiously, his earlier authority replaced by something that looked like humility. Operative Anderson, I owe you an apology that I can't adequately express. The way I treated you, the boot on your back, the mockery. You were doing your job, Sergeant, Sarah replied, and there was no anger in her voice, only exhaustion. You saw what appeared to be a weak recruit and responded appropriately. That's exactly what I needed you to see. But the disrespect helped maintain my cover, Sarah said, echoing her earlier words. Although, and here a tiny smile crossed her face, your boot was heavier than necessary. I won't forget that during evaluation season. Harris couldn't tell if she was joking, and the uncertainty on his face made several nearby personnel smile despite the gravity of the situation. The aftermath investigation revealed the scope of what Sarah had uncovered. Thompson's network spanned 4 bases with 12 compromised personnel, each one selling intelligence that cost American lives. The takedown operations were swift and coordinated, guided by the meticulous analysis Sarah had compiled over 3 years of hunting ghosts. By evening, Fort Benning was in full crisis mode, but the immediate threat was contained. Sarah stood in Colonel Matthews' office, her arm in a proper medical sling now. The base doctors had been horrified at the nerve damage she'd been enduring without treatment, at the permanent injury she carried as proof of her sacrifice. "What now?" Matthews asked. "Your cover's blown. Everyone knows who you are. The video of your tattoo is probably already spreading through every military base in the country." "My work here is done," Sarah replied, her voice carrying the finality of someone who'd completed a mission that had defined 3 years of her life. 731 may be officially dead, but there are other ghosts out there, other units that need justice, other traitors who need to be found before they sell more American blood for profit. You could stay, train our people. You've proven you're one of the best operators this country has ever produced. Sarah shook her head, blonde curls escaping from her regulation bun. "That's not who I am, sir. I'm not a teacher. I'm a hunter, and there's still hunting to be done." A knock on the door interrupted them. Matthews called enter, and the morning's antagonists filed in. Brandon, Jessica, Tyler, Marcus, even Harris. They stood awkwardly in a loose formation, clearly uncomfortable but determined. "We wanted to apologize," Jessica said, speaking for the group. Her perfect ponytail was disheveled now, her usual confidence replaced by something that looked like shame. "The way we treated you was inexcusable. We judged you on appearance, mocked you for showing weakness. We were everything wrong with—" Sarah held up her hand, stopping the recitation of sins. "You couldn't have known who I was. That was the entire point." "But that's not an excuse," Brandon interjected, his voice carrying weight it hadn't had that morning. "He'd killed a man today, saved a life, and come face to face with consequences that change people. We should have treated you with basic respect, regardless of who you were or what we thought you were." "You want forgiveness?" Sarah asked, her blue eyes moving across each file. "Fine, you're forgiven, but don't do it for me. Do it for the next person who doesn't look like they belong, who seems weak or different or wrong, because there will be a next person, and they might not be a ghost. They might just be someone trying their best, and your mockery could break them." The weight of her words settled over the group like a physical thing. "Can I ask?" Tyler said hesitantly, his usual phone camera bravado completely gone. "About Syria? What really happened there?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and everyone could see her deciding how much truth to share, how many ghosts to let out of their carefully locked boxes. "You want a war story?" she finally said. "Heroes and villains, clear-cut battles?" She shook her head. "War isn't like that. It's mud and blood and friends dying for reasons that stop making sense the longer you're out there. It's holding position while electricity runs through your body, because giving up means more good people die. It's coming home with scars nobody can see and trying to figure out how to be normal again when nothing will ever be normal." She looked at each of them, her gaze lingering longest on Brandon, who'd learned the hardest lesson today. "You want to honor what happened? Be better, train harder, look out for each other, and never, ever judge a book by its cover, because someday you might meet another ghost, and by the time you realize what they are, it might be too late for apologies." As they filed out, humbled and changed, Jake Sullivan remained behind. He pulled something from his pocket, a worn St. Christopher medal that had seen better days. "Tower 4, Syria," he said, holding it out to Sarah. "You mentioned this in your briefing. Said I had it wrapped around my rifle stock." Sarah took the medal, her trembling fingers closing around it gently. "I remember. You were checking it between shots, like it was keeping you alive." "It did keep me alive," Jake said, "but not because of any saint. Because you held that position for 3 days, took torture that should have killed you, and never gave up our location. You were the miracle, not this medal." He pressed it into her hand. "I want you to have it. You saved me once. Maybe it can return the favor." Sarah looked at the medal for a long moment, then handed it back. "Give it to someone who needs protection, Corporal. I'm already dead, remember? Ghosts don't need guardian angels." 3 days later, Sarah Anderson disappeared from Fort Benning as quietly as she'd arrived. Her barracks room was empty, her paperwork filed, her false identity erased from the system, as if she'd never existed. But her impact remained, spreading through the base like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. Harris implemented new training protocols emphasizing respect for all recruits, regardless of appearance or perceived weakness. Jessica started an anti-bullying campaign that spread across military social media, her perfect aesthetic now dedicated to substance over style. Tyler deleted his mocking videos and began studying intelligence work, inspired by Sarah's analytical methods. Marcus volunteered for additional combat training, determined to be worthy of the uniform he wore. And Brandon Miller, who'd fired his first shot in anger to save a life, began the long process of understanding what that meant and who he wanted to become because of it. The base never forgot the quiet recruit with the trembling arm who turned out to be death incarnate, who'd endured mockery and abuse to hunt a traitor, who'd taught them that strength comes in forms they'd never expected. But of Sarah Anderson, or whatever her real name was, there was no sign. She'd vanished back into whatever shadows ghosts called home, leaving behind only lessons written in humiliation endured and justice served. Until 6 months later, when Jake Sullivan received a package with no return address and no postal markings. Inside was a photograph, 5 operators in black gear standing before a helicopter in Syria, their faces obscured, but one smaller than the others, standing with that particular stillness he recognized. On the back, in precise handwriting, "Ghosts don't die, they multiply. Tower 4 sends its regards." He showed it to Harris, who'd kept Sarah's lesson alive in every class he taught. The sergeant studied it carefully, noting details invisible to untrained eyes. "Look," Harris pointed to the background. "Those mountains. That's not Syria." "Then where?" Harris stopped, his finger finding a detail in the corner. A newspaper stand, barely visible, with papers in a language he didn't recognize, but a date that was clear. 3 days ago. "She's operational again," Harris said quietly. "Somewhere in Eastern Europe, by the look of it." They burned the photo per protocol, but the message was clear. Sarah Anderson was still out there, still hunting, still protecting those who would never know her name. And somewhere in the mountains of a country that didn't officially have American operators, a woman with blonde curls and trembling hands was preparing for another mission, another hunt, another chapter in a story that would never be fully told, because the best operations were the ones nobody knew about until decades later when the secrets finally came to light. The tremor would never stop. The nerve damage was permanent, a constant reminder of 72 hours that changed her forever. But she'd learned to work with it, to make it part of her technique, to transform weakness into a different kind of strength. Because that's what ghosts do. They adapt. They endure. They find ways to complete the mission even when their bodies betray them, even when the world thinks they're finished. And sometimes, just sometimes, they teach lessons that change entire bases, entire cultures, entire understandings of what strength really means. The story would be told for years at Fort Benning, whispered in barracks, shared during training, passed from class to class like a legend. The details would change, become embellished, grow larger than life. But the core truth remained. Never underestimate the quiet ones, never mock those who seem weak, and always remember that the most dangerous person in the room might be the one everyone overlooks. Because somewhere out there, ghosts were watching, and they remembered everything. Financial management in modern military operations requires sophisticated insurance frameworks that protect both personnel and institutions. The comprehensive liability coverage systems used by elite military contractors include specialized provisions for classified operations, wrongful termination protection, and veteran employment rights. These advanced legal structures, costing upwards of $50,000 annually per covered facility, ensure that when sensitive information surfaces unexpectedly, both the whistleblower receives proper recognition and any terminated personnel face legally defensible consequences. The same insurance mechanisms that safeguard billion-dollar defense contracts now help bases like Fort Benning navigate the complex aftermath of counterintelligence breaches. The fallout at Fort Benning was swift and comprehensive, cascading through the 6 distinct layers that would reshape the base for years to come. The immediate scene consequences hit first. Brandon Miller, who'd fired his first shot to save Sarah's life, found himself in mandatory counseling sessions designed for soldiers who'd experienced combat. The base psychologist, Dr. Patricia Chen, noted in her reports how Brandon's hands shook during their sessions, not from weakness, but from the weight of understanding what taking a life actually meant beyond video games and bravado. Jessica Taylor's social media empire collapsed within 48 hours. The video of Sarah's tattoo reveal went viral, but not in the way Jessica had planned. Instead of mockery, the comments were filled with veterans sharing their own stories of misjudging heroes, of learning humility through harsh lessons. Jessica's sponsors, fitness brands, and lifestyle companies quietly pulled their partnerships. Her follower count dropped by 30,000 in a week. But something unexpected happened. She started posting different content, real content, stories about respecting people regardless of appearance, about the danger of assumptions, about learning from catastrophic mistakes. Tyler Roberts deleted every mocking video he'd ever made, wiping his channel clean despite the loss of ad revenue that represented. He enrolled in the Army's intelligence school, driven by Sarah's analytical methods and the realization that real power came from understanding, not ridicule. His application essay focused on a recruit who taught him that observation without judgment was the first principle of good intelligence work. Marcus Davis, who'd grabbed Sarah's arm and been thrown across the room for his trouble, volunteered for every additional combat training session available. He showed up early, stayed late, pushed himself until his instructors worried about burnout. When asked why, he said simply, "I need to be worthy of this uniform. She was worthy, and I treated her like garbage. That changes now." Personal ripple effects spread outward from the immediate participants. Brandon's father, a retired colonel who'd served 3 decades, showed up at Fort Benning unannounced. He found his son in the base chapel at 0300 hours, staring at his hands. "I killed a man, Dad," Brandon said without preamble. "I took a life." "You saved one," his father replied, sitting beside him. "There's a difference." "Is there? He's still dead because of me. He's dead because he betrayed his country and was about to murder a federal agent. You were the instrument of consequence, not the cause." The older Miller put his hand on his son's shoulder. "The fact that it weighs on you, that's what makes you different from him. He killed for money. You killed to protect. Never forget that distinction." Professional impacts transformed careers. Harris, the drill sergeant who'd put his boot on a Black Viper operative's back, submitted a formal request for retraining in advanced tactical instruction. His application included a brutally honest assessment. "I have spent 20 years teaching soldiers to identify threats. I failed to recognize the most skilled operator I've ever encountered because I judged appearance over ability. I need to learn how to teach others to avoid my mistake." The request was approved within 24 hours. Harris found himself studying under instructors who'd worked with special operations units, learning to recognize the subtle tells that marked truly elite soldiers. The way they moved, the way they assessed environments, the way their training showed through even when they tried to hide it. Elena Williams, who'd tried to defend Sarah during that first PT formation, received a personal commendation from Colonel Matthews. More importantly, she was offered a position in the base's new counterintelligence liaison program, a direct result of lessons learned from Sarah's operation. Elena's ability to see what others missed, to question assumptions when everyone else was certain, marked her as someone with intelligence analyst potential. Community transformation rippled through Fort Benning like seismic waves. The culture of automatic mockery for anyone who seemed different or weak began to shift. It wasn't instant. Military culture changes slowly, like turning an aircraft carrier, but it was real. New signs appeared in training areas. Strength takes many forms, and respect all who serve. They seemed corny at first, generated eye rolls from cynical veterans, but the story behind them, the trembling recruit who had been a ghost, gave the words weight they wouldn't have had otherwise. Rodriguez, the female recruit who'd briefly stood up for Sarah, became something of a legend herself. Her willingness to challenge authority on behalf of someone being mistreated, even before knowing Sarah's true identity, marked her as someone with moral courage. She found herself sought out by younger recruits who faced their own struggles, who needed someone to believe in them before they believed in themselves. The Bunker, Fort Benning's most popular off-base bar, underwent its own transformation. The owner, a veteran named Murphy who'd served in Desert Storm, commissioned a mural for the back wall. It showed a figure in shadow, gender ambiguous, with a trembling hand holding a rifle with perfect form. Below it, in stark letters, "Judge the shot, not the shooter." Veterans gathered there would tell the story to newcomers, each version slightly different, but the core truth remaining. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Never mock those who seem weak, and always remember that heroes don't always look like recruitment posters. Institutional changes came from the top down. Colonel Matthews, working with Pentagon brass who were quietly horrified at how long Sarah's investigation had taken, implemented new protocols. The Counterintelligence Training Program, officially called CITP but known as Ghost Protocol among those who understood its origin, was designed to identify potential insider threats before they could sell American lives. But more than that, it trained instructors to recognize hidden excellence, to see past disabilities, past apparent weakness, past all the surface judgments that had nearly allowed a traitor to escape justice. The program's motto, suggested by Harris and approved by Matthews, was simple: every soldier has a story. Read before judging. Advanced education platforms have revolutionized how military personnel continue their professional development while serving. Online courses specifically designed for active duty soldiers provide flexible learning and intelligence analysis, strategic planning, and leadership development. These programs, accredited by major universities and tailored to military schedules, cost between $3,000 to $15,000 per semester, but offer veterans priority enrollment and specialized GI Bill coverage, the same distance learning technology that enables soldiers to earn degrees from combat zones now helps instructors like Harris retrain themselves in recognizing excellence hidden beneath unexpected exteriors. Long-term legacy began to take shape in the months following Sarah's departure. Fort Benning became known in military circles as the base that learned humility, that transformed its culture because one ghost had taught them all a lesson written in endurance and expertise hidden beneath a trembling hand. Recruiting numbers for specialized units actually increased. Young soldiers, inspired by the story of someone who had overcome permanent nerve damage to remain operational, saw disability differently, saw limitation as challenge rather than endpoint. Applications to special operations programs from candidates with various physical challenges increased by 40%. Not all were accepted, but the fact that they tried spoke to a cultural shift. Training protocols evolved. Instructors were now required to undergo sensitivity training, but not the corporate kind that everyone mocked. This was different. Veterans with combat injuries teaching about adaptation, operators with PTSD explaining how invisible wounds shaped capability, soldiers who had served with ghosts explaining how the most dangerous people often hide in plain sight. The story spread beyond Fort Benning. Other bases heard about the trembling recruit who'd been a Black Viper operative, about the traitor caught because everyone underestimated the investigator. The tale grew in the telling, became legend, became the kind of story soldiers told each other in barracks worldwide. 6 months after Sarah's disappearance, something happened that brought everything full circle. A new recruit arrived at Fort Benning, older than typical, maybe 35, with a pronounced limp and a thick accent that might have been Eastern European. Paperwork perfect, background clean, too clean, some noticed. The kind of flawless file that made people who'd learned from Sarah's lesson pay attention. Harris watched from his office as the recruit joined formation, noted how the other recruits began the familiar pattern of mockery for the outsider who didn't fit their image of a soldier. But this time, Brandon Miller was there as an instructor, promoted after his actions at the ranger station. Jessica Taylor was watching from the support office where she now worked, in morale and welfare. Tyler, now in intelligence training, had flagged the too perfect background file. They all saw what others missed, the way the recruit cataloged exits despite the limp, the perfect weight distribution that spoke of advanced training, the eyes that assessed everything while appearing to see nothing, the small tells that marked someone far more skilled than they pretended to be. Rodriguez picked up his phone, dialed a number that went to a voicemail box that didn't officially exist. Package arrived, handling with care. He didn't expect a response. Ghosts don't make social calls. But 3 days later, a single text appeared on his personal phone from an unknown number. Good hunting. The new recruit turned out to be exactly what they seemed. A foreign officer cross-training with U.S. forces. No ghost, no secret identity, no hidden investigation. But the fact that they'd checked, that they'd protected someone who might have been vulnerable, that they'd learned to look beyond surface assumptions, that was Sarah's true legacy. Fort Benning had learned to see. If you've made it this far in Sarah's story, you understand that real strength isn't always visible, that heroes don't always announce themselves, and that the most profound lessons often come from the people we initially dismiss. Hit that subscribe button to join a community that believes in looking deeper, in respecting the hidden battles others fight, in understanding that weakness and strength can coexist in the same trembling hand. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's been underestimated, someone who's judged others too quickly, someone who needs to remember that ghosts walk among us, protecting us from threats we'll never see. Years passed. The global war evolved, shifted, presented new challenges that required new solutions. Units that should have been ambushed weren't. Operations that should have failed succeeded. Someone was hunting the hunters, protecting the protectors, operating in shadows that even shadows couldn't penetrate. Occasionally, reports would surface in classified briefings accessible only to those with the highest clearances. An impossible shot from an impossible distance that saved a patrol in Yemen. Intelligence that arrived just in time to prevent a catastrophe in the Philippines. A terrorist network dismantled before they could execute an attack on American forces in the Horn of Africa. Always in places where someone with permanent nerve damage shouldn't be able to operate effectively. Always with the same cryptic signature, 731. Colonel Matthews, promoted to general now, kept a file that didn't officially exist. In it were reports, sightings, fragments of intelligence that suggested Sarah Anderson, or someone very much like her, was still operational. The tremor hadn't stopped her. Age hadn't slowed her. She had become what she'd always been, a ghost story that saved lives without seeking credit, that changed the world from shadows that swallowed names and faces, but never missions. The real transformation, though, was at Fort Benning and bases like it across the world. The culture of automatic mockery for anyone different or seemingly weak had fundamentally shifted. Not eliminated, military culture has too much momentum for instant change, but challenged, questioned, evolved. Harris, now a master sergeant running advanced instructor training, made Sarah's lesson part of every class. You will be tempted to judge each other on appearance, on perceived weakness, on who doesn't fit your idea of a warrior, he'd tell new instructors. Remember that the greatest warrior I ever met looked like someone's lost daughter and couldn't hold her arms steady. Remember that strength isn't always visible. Remember that the person you mock today might be the one saving your life tomorrow. Brandon Miller, now a Special Forces captain, carried those lessons into the most elite units in the American military. He assembled unconventional teams that baffled traditional military thinking. The soldier with the stutter who noticed details others missed. The one with the prosthetic leg who developed supernatural balance to compensate. The quiet one everyone overlooked, who had a mind like a tactical computer. Miller's Misfits, they were called, and they had the highest mission success rate in their command, because Brandon had learned from Sarah that strength wore countless disguises, that limitation often bred innovation, that the people everyone dismissed were sometimes exactly the people you needed most. Jessica Taylor had risen through military psychology ranks, specializing in identifying and nurturing overlooked talent. Her doctoral thesis, Perceived Weakness as Strategic Advantage in Military Operations, became required reading at war colleges. She never named Sarah, but those who knew the story recognized the inspiration on every page. Elena Williams achieved her own version of ghost status, working in intelligence so classified, her family thought she had a desk job processing paperwork. She'd learned from Sarah that the best operators were those no one suspected, and had built her career on being underestimated, on using her slight frame and young face as armor against assumption. The bunker's mural became a pilgrimage site for military personnel who heard the story. Soldiers would stand before it, studying that shadowed figure with the trembling hand and perfect shooting form, and understand viscerally what words could only approximate, that heroism comes in forms we don't expect, that sacrifice leaves scars both visible and invisible, and that the truest warriors often hide their strength until the moment when revealing it saves lives. Somewhere in Eastern Europe, or the Middle East, or Southeast Asia, in places where American forces operated officially, or unofficially, or not at all, a woman with blonde hair touched with gray now sat in rooms that didn't exist, studying intelligence reports that would be burned after reading. The tremor in her right hand had worsened over the years. Doctors had warned her it would progress, that nerve damage from prolonged electrical torture didn't improve with time. But she'd adapted, evolved, made her disability part of her technique in ways that medical science couldn't explain, but operational results proved undeniable. Around her, younger ghosts prepared for missions that would bust or make headlines, in countries where American involvement would be denied, against threats that most citizens would never know existed. They watched Sarah work despite her tremor, watched her type reports with hands that shook, watched her plan operations with the same precision she'd used to hunt Thompson. "Does it hurt?" one young operative asked, watching Sarah's hand shake as she marked targets on a tactical map. "Every day," Sarah replied honestly. "Every hour, really. Then why keep going?" Sarah looked at the map, at the markers representing threats to American lives, at the complex web of intelligence that only existed because she'd spent years becoming invisible to hunt visible evil. Because pain is just information. Limitation is just a problem to solve, and someone needs to keep the darkness at bay. She looked at the young operative, saw eagerness tempered by inexperience, potential waiting for the right lesson. "Remember that when your time comes. Everyone breaks eventually. What matters is what you do with the pieces." The room fell silent except for the rustle of classified papers and the distant sound of a city waking to another day in a world that didn't know how close it came to disaster, how often it was saved by people whose names would never be known. Sarah allowed herself one moment of reflection. From Syria to Fort Benning to 100 missions since, the tremor had been her constant companion. It had cost her a normal life, cost her identity, cost her everything except the ability to serve. But it had also given her something, the understanding that strength and weakness were not opposites but partners in the dance of survival. Tomorrow would bring new threats. The network of enemies never slept, never stopped evolving, never ceased their hunt for American blood to convert into profit. But neither did the ghosts. Neither did the soldiers who'd learned from Sarah's example at Fort Benning and carried those lessons into the most dangerous corners of the world. The tremor would never stop. The nerve damage was permanent, etched into her body like the tattoo on her arm. 7 coils representing 7 teammates, only one of whom still lived. But she'd learned something that no medical textbook could teach. The body's limitations were only suggestions when the mission mattered more than comfort. And somewhere, in barracks and training facilities and forward operating bases across the globe, her story continued. Not in her name, ghosts don't have names, but in the changed minds of those who'd learned to see past appearance, to respect hidden strength, to understand that the most dangerous person in any formation might be the one everyone overlooks. Fort Benning would never forget the trembling recruit, but more importantly, they'd never forget the lesson. That judgment based on appearance is the weakness of the judge, not the judged. That strength takes forms we don't expect, that the people who save us are often the ones we never see coming. And in the shadows where ghosts operated, in the classified files that would stay sealed for 50 years, in the memories of soldiers who knew the truth, Sarah Anderson remained what she'd always been. A reminder that heroes don't always announce themselves, that sacrifice leaves marks both visible and invisible, and that sometimes the trembling hand holds the steadiest aim. The mission continued. It always would, because that's what ghosts do. They endure, they adapt, they protect from shadows, and they teach lessons that echo through generations of soldiers who learn to see beyond the surface, to respect all who serve, and to remember that real warriors know the greatest victories are won by those who never need to take credit for them. 5 open mysteries remained, whispered in classified circles, debated in intelligence briefings that officially never happened. Was Sarah's entire background, even her name, fabricated, or did a real Sarah Anderson exist somewhere, unknowing that her identity had been borrowed by a ghost? What happened to the other members of Unit 731 who'd been declared KIA? Were any besides Sarah still operating in deep cover, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves? How extensive was the traitor network Thompson had been part of? Had they truly dismantled it all, or were there deeper layers still operational, still selling American lives? What was Sarah's connection to the new recruit who'd arrived 6 months later? Coincidence, or another ghost beginning their own hunt? And the question that kept intelligence analysts awake at night, in a world where ghosts multiplied, where operators vanished into legends, how many Sarah Andersons walked among us right now, trembling hands hiding lethal capability, protecting us from threats we'd never know existed until history declassified the truth 50 years too late? The answers, like Sarah herself, remained classified, hidden, protected by shadows that swallowed secrets and names, but never the impact of lessons learned through humiliation endured and justice earned. At Fort Benning, the morning formation assembled at 05:30, just like always. New recruits stood in perfect rows, nervous and eager, and completely unaware that they were standing on ground, sanctified by a ghost sacrifice. Harris walked the line, his eyes no longer seeing just uniforms and faces, but stories waiting to be read, strength waiting to be recognized, heroes who didn't yet know what they would become. And somewhere in the world, Sarah Anderson prepared for another mission, with trembling hands and steady purpose, carrying forward the legacy of Unit 731. That real warriors don't advertise their power, that service doesn't require recognition, and that sometimes the most profound strength is the kind that stays hidden until the moment when revealing it saves the lives that matter most. The tremor continued, constant and unending. So did the mission. So did the legacy of learning to see beyond assumptions, to respect all who serve, and to remember that ghosts walk among us, not to haunt, but to protect. 10 years later, the story had become legend, then myth, then something more fundamental. A shift in consciousness that permeated military culture like water seeping into stone, changing it from within. Fort Benning graduated its 1,000th class since Sarah's revelation, and every single graduate had heard the story, understood the lesson, carried forward the understanding that strength wore countless faces. Harris, now approaching retirement, stood before his final class of instructors. His hair had gone completely gray, his face mapped with lines that told stories of hard lessons learned and harder truths accepted. "I once put my boot on the back of the most skilled operative I've ever encountered," he told them, as he had told 100 classes before. "She let me because the mission required it. She taught me that true strength knows when not to use itself, that real power often hides behind apparent weakness, and that the greatest warriors are the ones you never see coming." He paused, looking at the faces before him, young, eager, certain they knew what warriors looked like. "Some of you will meet your own Sarah Anderson. Maybe not a ghost operative, maybe just someone who doesn't fit your expectations. When that moment comes, remember this. Judgment based on appearance is your weakness, not theirs. See them, really see them, because the person you dismiss today might be the hero who saves your life tomorrow, or might simply be someone trying their best who deserves your respect regardless." The tremor that had marked Sarah's arm for over a decade had taught the world something medical science couldn't measure, that broken things could still serve, that damaged warriors could still fight, that limitations were just problems waiting for creative solutions. Every soldier with a disability who refused to quit, every operator who adapted instead of surrendering, every person who turned their weakness into unexpected strength, they were all part of Sarah's legacy now. Somewhere in the world, in a place that didn't exist on any map, a woman whose name had been classified into obscurity sat with hands that still shook, still trembled with the rhythm of sacrifice. She was older now, the blonde touched with more gray, the scars on her body multiplied by missions that would never be acknowledged. But her eyes remained sharp, her purpose undiminished, her commitment absolute. The tremor had never stopped. Neither had she, because that's what real warriors do. They endure, they adapt, they protect from shadows, and they prove every single day that strength isn't about steady hands or perfect bodies. It's about steady purpose and an unbreakable will to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them, regardless of the personal cost. And in doing so, they change the world one lesson at a time, one challenged assumption at a time, one moment of true seeing at a time, until the day comes when we all finally understand that heroes walk among us wearing every possible face, carrying every possible burden, and deserving every possible respect. The mission continues. It always will. Because ghosts never truly die. They multiply, they teach, they transform, and they remind us that the most profound strength is often the kind that trembles.